Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Dublin to Denver podcast with me, Colum Cronin. The sun is shining in Dublin. We are headed into the summer. The Oklahoma City Thunder are ruining basketball. Stuart and I sometimes delve into this. Stuart is a basketball expert. I am not. But I do know bad basketball, terrible basketball, flopping and playing the percentages. And that's what the world seems to be now. It seems to be, trying not to lose rather than winning. It seems to be data above all else. And it seems to be, trying to get as many clicks as one possibly can on the social media algorithm. To delve in to that, and what we have this week is we both have a story that neither of the one of us is aware of the other person's story, and we're going to react to that. I am joined by my friend, colleague, and co-host Stuart Roach. Stuart, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, Colin. Obviously, the sun is out, which is something of a rarity in Ireland. It's more reminiscent of Malaga than it is of Dublin, but long may it continue. He said, knowing that it's probably not going to continue for very much longer at all. So let's enjoy it while it's there. I thank you for saying that I'm an expert in basketball, Colin. I am anything but an expert in basketball, and suddenly anybody who has heard me listens to me shouting on the sidelines of my son's games would know that that my cat probably knows more about basketball. But I don't think San Antonio are out of it just yet. I think this always felt like it was going to go to 7 games, Colin. Unfortunately, Oklahoma have Game 7 in their place. There's a great pressure on you, of course. Then the San Antonio Spurs now need to win at home to force that Game 7. But, this has been it's been a very interesting series so far. It's been some great basketball. I know what you're saying in regards to SGA. He certainly does look for a free throw, even it seems on fast breaks when there's no one even in the same half of the court as him. He seems to sort of throw his hands up, but he is a damn fine player and very evenly matched. I wouldn't envy the Knicks, Colin, who I think have done tremendously well, and obviously you've got to be happy with the likes of Chalamet and Ben Stiller and these guys and Spike Lee who have stood by them or sat by them, I suppose, in many lean years. So it's good to see for the Knicks, one of the storied franchises in the NBA who haven't won the ABA championship, column since Phil Jackson was a player. So that's going back quite some time, and they haven't even been in the finals since LeBron. He hadn't even played high school basketball at this point, never mind get drafted. So it's good to see for the Knicks. Apart from hated enemies of ours, Colin, I know we always like to see teams that have struggled to make a breakthrough. I think, for example, in the NFL recently, very few people would have had an issue with the Lions, for example, having some relative success. So, delighted for the Knicks. But I think whoever wins in the West, Colin, is going to probably win the championships. I don't think that's anything startling to suggest that, but I think the Knicks will give a good fight. But I'd be looking at, even if it is San Antonio or if it is OKC, I'd be looking at a sort of 4-2 type of a scoreline. I think New York will be tricky. Boisterous fans, which has been proven time and time again. But my money now would be on whoever comes out of the West to win that in 6. So that's as close to an expert as you're going to get from me on basketball. But yeah, it's what did we get out of that? 4 minutes, Colin? You noticed that I was spending more time talking about basketball than football because there isn't really anything going on at the moment. We were both saying before we came on air that there are times when you pine for the likes of Talib to liven things up. We haven't even got OTAs this week, Colin. We're one of the later teams going into OTAs. I think about 10 teams have started in the last day or two. We're holding off till I think this time next week or tomorrow week. So we don't even have that. We don't even have the sighting of who's going to be the Denver Broncos preseason darling, who will ultimately be traded for a 7th round pick to the Cleveland Browns as the season starts.
I no doubt that there will undoubtedly be a camp darling. We know that it will be the case. It's the Broncos, but what we do have, Stuart, what I wanted to highlight to you was, and it's it's Broncos related, but it's bigger than that. Because Mina Kimes and Benjamin Solak ranked the NFL QBs. I suppose it's just this past week, and any list is going to be subjective, Stuart. I think we can say that, and that's, you can understand that to an extent. I think you could certainly make an argument that perhaps Josh Allen should be the number one QB in the league, given that Patrick Mahomes is coming off the ACL. You could make an argument that it should be Matthew Stafford, given the body of work that he continues to put up. I think you can say things, but Stuart, the reason I'm bringing this up is because can you guess whereabouts, Kimes and Solak had Bo Nix on the list?
Well, from what I remember, Colum, I've always thought Mina Kimes was probably a little bit pro Denver. But I know through you mentioning it in the past that Solak has had some really bizarre takes about Bo Nix. Solak is one of the guys, I think he was one of the guys who struggled to give Nix any credit at all, and then softened slightly. He's not one of the lunatics that have him ranked 34th or 35th out of all NFL QBs. Or there were some people who just refused to move him. So I know Solak is one of those experts, in inverted commas, that has decided to completely ignore the fact that Bo Nix is, I think, top 5 for QBs in 2 years when it comes to touchdown passes. They've conveniently left all that out. They also seem to have conveniently left out the fact that he had to go full John Elway to beat the Bills, to take the Broncos to an AFC Championship game that they would have won had he not got injured. So I'm thinking probably, this may even be high, I'm thinking 15 or 16. Kimes maybe a little higher, maybe 12.
They had him at 20th.
20th,
Stuart. But the 20th, while I think you would argue that is lower than we would have him.
Mm-hmm. Considerably lower.
Yes. If somebody was to give a coherent argument as to perhaps why, while I might not agree, I might be willing to hear it. But the issue for me, Stuart, is, and it's a wider problem. This is pure rage bait, because I say that because they have Fernando Mendoza at number 16. Mendoza, who is yet to throw a pass in the NFL. Now, did Mendoza look like a good QB last year? Sure. But Stuart, we have seen, the transition to the league go absolutely fantastically well. We have seen it go much less well. The other QBs who were ahead of Bo Nix, I think, where you've really kind of asked some questions, were CJ Stroud, who has absolutely fallen off a cliff since that rookie year. And obviously was impressive, very impressive early on in that rookie year. But I think you begin to see teams maybe begin to figure him out even towards the end of that campaign, and has been very, very poor over the last couple of campaigns. And Kyler Murray, who obviously one time number 1 overall pick, now on a new team. We'll see how he does. But I thought that was interesting. They had Mendoza above Sam Darnold also. Now, Darnold, as we said on this podcast, if the Seahawks had a good QB, they would have put up all sorts of numbers on the Patriots. But I don't think you can say that Mendoza is better than Sam Darnold, who has gone on to show that he can do it in the playoffs, and has learned from the the fact that he used to give the game away. They have Drake May. Yep, Drake May in at number 5. Now I like May. I think May gets some like unfair stick in terms of there wasn't a whole lot he could do about the schedule, but he undoubtedly was very poor in the playoffs last year and in the Super Bowl itself. I mean, significantly so. I think he has things to really prove. And as you said, I mean, Bo Nix, the other thing on this is Kimes last year had Geno Smith when she had Stephen Ruiz, who is the lunatic who has Bo Nix at like 34th. They had Geno Smith at 8th, Stuart. And I can, if that was a real point, if you genuinely believed it, and then it didn't work out, and then you offered a mea culpa, and you said why you got it so wrong, then I'd believe it. But none of that was forthcoming. And that's why I believe it's just for clicks. She had Bomani on, again, does not like Bo Nix. And even when we were playing the Bills, she had Bill Barnwell on, and Barnwell and her both talked about the Bills defense and about how tricky the Bills defense was, and how if the Broncos were going to beat the Bills, they would need Bo Nix to take a huge step up. Now we know in that game, Bo was throwing the ball to lads pulled from the stands. We had no running game, and as you said, he Elway-esque in winning it. I just think the Stephen A-ification of sports media is horrific, and all it is now is who can shout the loudest. And if you're wrong, you don't offer mea culpa, you don't say why you were wrong, you just ignore it until either the player has a dip in form and then you bring it back up again, or you just pretend that you never said it. There ended my particular rant on the one last thing. She kind of got called on it and was saying it and was like, it was supposed to be a QB draft, it wasn't rankings, and yet in her own tweet she had QB rankings here. So talk about running with the hare and chasing with the hounds.
Well, as you said, Colum, I think rage bait is the only sort of way this can make any kind of sense, because and look, I am on the record. I think Mendoza is going to be a really good quarterback in the NFL, and unfortunately, he reminds me a lot of Joe Burrow when Joe Burrow was at LSU, but he hasn't played in the NFL. So to have him ranked higher than 15 other quarterbacks who have, I'm presuming there was no other rookie, because Ty Simpson hasn't taken a snap for the Rams yet. I think he was the only other quarterback in the first round. And did he sneak? I'm surprised that he can get ahead of Nix. But like I think people have become so entrenched with this position on Nix that it's just bizarre, Colin. I think you have to allow for a player to develop. I think it all seems to stem back from the fact that pre-draft, some draft experts, and again, this is in inverted commas, had Nix coming in the second rounder. And then when Nix bounced back from a rocky start and had an outstanding NFL rookie campaign where he was unlucky in that Jaden Daniels had an historic rookie campaign, it was because he landed with Sean Payton, despite the fact that the weapons were not superb in his first year. Then we went out and got better weapons. Nix's early season struggles were again used as proof that the Broncos winning despite Nix, not because of him. And then again, it's just all completely brushed under the carpet, and it's as you said, it's never mentioned. Look, we've had takes like this from Broncos fan bases as well, Colin, where there's all kinds of proclamations about how this player is going to do this and this player is going to do that. Then they get released or then they barely play a snap. And then it's just never mentioned again. Like, I know we don't want to slap ourselves in the back too often on the show, but one thing about us is that we do pride ourselves on the fact that if we get a take wrong, we are the first people to admit it. We've got the Caleb Loner t-shirts ready to go. We just need, it's in the drafts. We can send it to Redbubble and we can get it printed up as soon as Caleb proves he's an NFL starting caliber tight end. But we will hold our hands up if we get it wrong, Colin. So I think, look, the thing about it is the Broncos are very much in an upward trajectory. They're sort of ranked between first and third in most preseason rankings when it comes to power. The NFL power rankings, the Broncos would feature in them. I haven't seen them lower than 5 in any of them. Again, for what that's worth, given that this particular iteration of the Denver Broncos hasn't played a snap together. But I don't think that, as we've seen, Colum, over the years, you can have an elite defense that can do well for a season. We've seen time and time again elite defenses like the Ravens, the Seahawks, the Broncos themselves in 2015. They're good to win one Super Bowl, but they don't win two. The Seahawks were close in that they should have won the second one, but then Pete Carroll obviously lost his mind and decided not to run the ball. But historically, what has been proven is elite defenses can win you one championship, but they cannot win you back-to-backs. They cannot really have you towards the championship end of things time and time again. And it would be a gross disappointment if the Broncos didn't at least make the divisional round this year. And I think, like most people, I fully expect the Broncos to be back in the AFC Championship game. And the Broncos defense is elite at the moment, Colin, but I still wouldn't have them on a par with the 2015 Broncos, with the Legion of Boom. I wouldn't have them with the 85 Bears. They're still to prove that. They're still to show that they're at that elite level. So the offense, even though it's had some struggles, must be doing something right. They must be contributing. It's not like Bo Nix is Brad Johnson, who was the quarterback of a really good Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that, again, only won the one Super Bowl with an elite defense. It's not like he's the guy who was a really ordinary quarterback who was the QB for that Baltimore Ravens team. It's not like he's him. I can't remember his name. He became an ESPN.
Well, Trent Dilfer is another QB.
Dilfer. Yeah. I mean, it's not like Nix is Dilfer, but he seems like he's treated like Dilfer. So look, we've got better weapons on offense. We went out and we made that trade for Jalen Waddle, who, which is as big a blockbuster as we've seen since the Russell Wilson trade. So I think the best way for Nix to answer all this, and he genuinely comes across as somebody who doesn't seem to care particularly much, is to go out and prove it on the field. And I would think, ankle injury aside, I would expect Nix to go up a level again, because his trajectory since the minute he's come into the league has been heading in that way. He had a rocky start, as we said, and he was vastly improved by the end of the season. Then he did take that leap in the second year. So I'd expect an even better year from Bo Nix, injuries permitting, and maybe he'll be ranked 18th. But then, Arch Manning and the kid from Oregon will probably be ranked ahead of him before they play. It's getting to the stage now, Colin, where you're kind of expecting guys from the XFL or Canadian football to be ranked ahead of Nix. That such is the disrespect. But look, this is all stuff that, and Sean Payton is doing this, Colin. This is all stuff for Sean Payton to print out and put on the dressing room walls. So I think this stuff ultimately can be used to Nix's advantage and to the team as well. So, but it's at this stage you kind of. It'd be a nice, pleasant surprise for somebody to actually rank Nix where he should be ranked, which is in and around that 10-12 mark, I think, and hopefully ascending even further into this next year.
We shall see. Now, you have a story that I have not seen. Yeah,
so you actually mentioned him, Colum, and it would have been a very pleasant segue. But Bill Barnwell, who is okay, I think he's not one of the headbangers who has taken a dislike to Nix and refuses to shift position. I think he's one of the more reasonable NFL experts. He had a column on ESPN.com a few days ago, which was the 2026 offseason, the AFC's best and worst deals or best and worst picks. So with the Denver Broncos, which he has as the Denver Broncos' best move was re-signing J.K. Dobbins. And the way he worded it was, since 2020, 51 running backs have racked up 500 or more rushing attempts. And amongst those backs, J.K. Dobbins ranks as third in yards per carry, ninth in success rate, second in explosive play rate, first in rushing yards over expectation, and first in EPA per rush attempt. He also hasn't fumbled since 2020. Not a great receiver, but he might be the most efficient back in the league with the ball in his hands. If you needed a healthy running back to take 15 handles in a game, Dobbins wouldn't be anyone's first pick, but he wouldn't be far off. Unfortunately, there was the situation with the injuries. So what he does say then is the Broncos re-signed him to a 2-year, $16 million deal this offseason, guaranteeing Dobbins $8 million for 2026 in the process. That is third wide receiver money in the modern NFL. And if you project Dobbins to play only half the games this year, Denver is getting a player who produces like one of the league's best backs for that stretch of time, which makes this a very, very palatable contract. So there's the good. If I was Barmel, Colum, I would have had a little asterisk with, and they have also given themselves some insurance by picking J.K. Dobbins' clone in the NFL draft in the 4th round in Coleman. But I guess you could argue that's the case, Colum. I would have tossed the coin between that and maybe going out and getting Waddle, but I can take Barnwell's points there. I think they're well made, and it's nothing that we don't know. J.K. Dobbins is an elite running back when healthy. The health is an issue, but they haven't really paid over the odds, and it's a pretty team friendly contract.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's the point that we've talked the whole time, Stuart. Nobody doubts the quality, but it's a concern. Like, if you know where the best coffee shop is in town, right, and it provides the best coffee, and every time you go there, but you don't know when it's going to be open or when it's going to be shut, or is it going to shut its doors for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks when you really, really need that coffee? That is the issue. Dobbins has all the talent in the world. I think if Dobbins had the durability of others, we would be talking about a guy who would be widely considered, but he just hasn't had that. But yeah, I mean, I think the insurance piece is great to see, and I think as a result of it, we will see Coleman take significant snaps this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so his worst, and I have to say, Colin, this is one that I 100% agree with, and there is still time to potentially rectify this, which is something that I've been talking about for a while, but it doesn't seem to have happened, and the longer it goes without it happening, the more I become concerned. The worst move that the Broncos offseason was failing to address the departure of John Franklin Myers. Broncos had a championship caliber defense last season, and Franklin Myers was one of the many players who helped Denver come within a quarterback injury of potentially making it back to the Super Bowl. It wasn't a surprise that Franklin Myers left for former coach Robert Saleh, but the Broncos haven't done much to replace the veteran. Their only addition so far is third-round pick Tyler Onyedem. Nothing wrong with asking Onyedem, second-year lineman Savion Jones, and 28-year-old Ezra Riki to take on some of Franklin Myers' workload, but this is a team with championship aspirations, given the Jalen Waddle trade. George Franklin seemed like he was trying to protect the compensatory picks, but that now is locked up, and it is a surprise to me that the Broncos weren't more aggressive in pursuing a veteran such as Calais Campbell, who was signed with the Rams, to help become part of that defensive line rotation. I would have added Colum to Calais Campbell, Cam Jordan, who I still see hasn't been signed by anybody. But I do think that's valid, Colum, because as much as the cheerleaders of the likes of Ezra Riki, Savion Jones, and Onyedem would have us believe that these guys are guaranteed to take the second-year leap or to get more in rotation, to come on as players in the case of Ezra Riki, who's been in the team for a while now. Onyedem was depending on where you looked at it. I've seen Onyedem ranked really low on pre-draft boards, Colum. I've also seen him kind of picked in and around where he should have been. But to ask that group of players to come in and produce what John Franklin Myers did, I think is potentially pie in the sky. And I also think that one of the key reasons why the Broncos D-line was able to consistently get pressure on the quarterback, aside from the fact that Zach Allen is a monster, was the fact that they were able to rotate players in and out and keep them fresh. So Malcolm Roach, for example, was somebody who was able to come in on certain downs and impact the game when Franklin Myers might have needed a break. You're now effectively asking Franklin Myers to become a bona fide starter. And suddenly then, the players that you've got coming in to rotate with him are probably just not at the level that Roach was last year. Roach isn't at the level that Franklin Myers was. So it is an area of the team that has been diminished slightly. You don't want to over-egg this, but there's no denying that the players that are there are not as good as Franklin Myers. That's just a fact. That's not to say that they can't become good players, but at the moment, looking at it, the Denver Broncos defense has got slightly weaker. So I think that is something that I am still surprised that Cameron Jordan hasn't been picked up, especially given the fact that he fills a position of need for us. He could be that rotational sack artist that we need. And also there's the link between him, Sean Payton, and the New Orleans Saints. So I did expect the Colum. I've called for this for a while now, and I fully expected the Broncos to pick up Cam Jordan. But there doesn't seem to be any signs of it. And the latest on him is that it's looking more likely that he's going to go back to the Saints. So that's one with Barnwell I agree with. Inside linebacker is another one you should probably make a case for that. Have we done enough? Who knows? I think we're putting a lot of stock on the two elder statesmen and some rookies. But I think looking at it from the outside, that is the position where you see the Denver Broncos are now clearly not as strong as they were last season. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I do think it is an issue, Stuart. And I think one of the reasons it is an issue is a piece that alongside the play, right, that you've talked about and that Barnwell talks about, I think the leadership piece is huge. And this is a piece where you won't be surprised that I'm going to talk about the media and spin, but the John Franklin Myers was the antithesis of Joe Flacco, right? Remember when Joe Flacco said it wasn't his job to coach or to mentor, and because he had just been brought into the building and the Broncos had given him a boatload of money, they ensured that Broncos media queued up or lined up for our American listeners to say, absolutely, oh, Joe is dead right. He could not be more right. Yeah, it isn't his job. Good job, Joe. Focus only on yourself and F them kids in a Mike Jordan type of way. But guess what? Football isn't basketball. Mentoring is really key. And leadership is really key. And we saw that time and time again from Franklin Myers. Franklin Myers knew all last year that he wasn't getting his deal. At no point did he down tools. At no point did he sulk. He went out, he played game after game, and he got himself the best contract. Alongside doing that, Stuart, because he didn't have to do any of it. He mentored the guys around him. He wanted to see them get better. He wants to see those guys get paid. So I think that's a big loss. The other thing I would point to, Stuart, on that is tangentially related is compare John Franklin Myers at the end of the season, right? And compare his demeanor and a guy who knows that he's not getting the contract, he's going to be out of the building, and how he was with Evan Ingram, who is coming back, who was always very likely to come back. That's where I have a real issue with Ingram. And I think that the Broncos, there's a lot of young players there. Hopefully they will take the step up. But I do think one of the key pieces to us, winning that Super Bowl was when we brought in DeMarcus Ware, and the impact that the DeMarcus Ware had on that defense and had on Vaughn, and the players talk about the speeches that DeMarcus Ware and Peyton Manning gave, and they were Peyton obviously was a shadow of who he once was. I just think when you let that walk out of the building, it can be tough unless you bring somebody in. And I think as well, you saw it last year. One of the smartest moves the Seahawks made was bringing DeMarcus Lawrence in from Seattle, and that or from Seattle from the Cowboys to Seattle, and from Dallas to Seattle, and that was one of the pieces I think that led to them ultimately winning the Super Bowl. So yeah, I think a lot of sense. And I mentioned Barnwell earlier because he was on with Mina Kimes, and they were talking about that Bills defense back in January. He has not. I have not seen him subsequently after saying how good the Bills defense was, and Bo Nix was going to need to be exceptional to beat them. Then run Bo Nix down after Bo Nix did just that. So, yeah, I think certainly very fair points from him.
I would add to that, Colin. I think I 100% take on board the leadership aspect as well as with Frank Lamar's as well as the play, which was really good last year. That's why I think Cameron Jordan also makes sense, because he was still productive as a player, but his leadership qualities are very well known, and his leadership qualities, I imagine, Colin, have been tested by the New Orleans Saints incompetence as an organization since Sean Payton has left and since Drew Brees retired. They're going through that sort of that hell that we went through when you lose a legendary coach or you lose a legendary quarterback. I know Tyler Shook has looked good in sort of spurts last year, but they're not out of it yet. But I think somebody who's able to maintain that level of performance in a team that has been struggling for a few years is somebody that I'd be interested in. And I can't imagine at this point he's going to cost a huge amount of money, Colin. And it makes more sense for me to bring in than the sort of the stories about Vaughn coming back, which I think is emotional. I think it would be a lovely story, but it's not the right move for us now. It's a position that we don't particularly need. Look, everybody adored Vaughn. One of the great NFL performances in the Super Bowl was his in Super Bowl 50. He's easily one of the Broncos' best defenders of all time, certainly top three, maybe even the best. But I think looking at it just slightly coldly, for me, Cam Jordan is a player that we need. Von Miller is a player that we don't, as wonderful a story as it would be, particularly if he rode off into the sunset with the Super Bowl in his belt. But I think resources could be better put elsewhere than Vaughn at the moment, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. Vaughn should retire a Bronco, but Vaughn should not be a Bronco next season. And teams that tend to, win Super Bowls make smart decisions rather than emotional decisions.
There's one last thing, Colin, before we finish up and go out and lather ourselves in sun cream and try not to get burnt to a crisp like typical Irishmen. I have already seen, not in many places, but one or two places, and I immediately thought of my old friend from Cork. There's already chat about Jade Barron being able to fully unlock his potential if he gets moved to safety. So
it would not be a Broncos off season if we weren't talking about moving a player's position or a guy either dramatically putting on weight or dramatically losing weight. Good times. Truly, the off season and the summer have arrived. Stuart and I will be back next week.
Sorry, God, one last thing. Unfortunately, this week, because OTAs aren't starting until I think 8 days' time, we don't know exactly how ripped Troy Franklin is. But I don't know about you, but I'm expecting Ivan Drago, Rocky 4 levels of man mountain to walk through. I think there'll be stories about how they didn't even recognize Troy Franklin. He's so big now when he reports back to duty. You watch.
Probably, and yet somehow nobody noticed the incredible amounts of weight Russ had put on between leaving Seattle and arriving in Denver. Anyway, you can find Stuart over on Blue Sky SRoach123. I'm across social media, Colum from Cork. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do rate, review, subscribe, or better yet, just tell a friend about us. We are 1 week closer to September. It's still a long way off. All that remains to be said for now is go Broncos.
Go Broncos.